good. Hey guys, how are you? I hope everybody had a great day. Give me some hearts, tap on the screen if you guys are able to hear me. I hope so. Basically, this second lecture is on inflammatory foods. And basically, the most important foods that we need to focus on are things that are going to cause inflammation in your body. I mentioned last time about the 5 basics to wellness. Top 5 were actually exercise, water, decreasing your sugar intake, how important it is to be mindful, and of course sleep. And today's lecture is on my top 8 that I consider the most important for inflammation in your body. I have suffered with this personally in the past, so this is definitely something that I can relate to. A lot of people, they start to develop symptoms that they don't even realize is due to inflammation in your body from all of the foods that you're eating. So on my Facebook the other day, I posted Hippocrates, let medicine be thy food, or let food be thy medicine rather. And actually food really is your medicine if you think about it. It's something that you're using every day to actually help your body function throughout the day. And not just that, you want to function at the most optimal level that you can. So it's really important for us to focus in on this for today. Inflammatory symptoms. If you've ever had any bloating after you eat, if you have any random skin rashes that you're not even sure about, for example, things where you actually didn't get stung by something or bit by something or a mosquito, if you have any sort of puffiness that just comes on about and you think, oh, maybe it's hormones, and you're not really sure. What about, let's see, necessary inflammations, stuffy noses that you don't realize, things like that. Weight gain, you may not even think about it, but it's maybe due to inflammation from the foods that you're eating. I would say out of my top 8 lists, my top 8 things that I consider to be top choices of inflammatory foods, there's probably one that's most important, and I'll save that one for last. We've already discussed it in my last lecture that I had, or my last Periscope, and I talked about it today during my inflammatory lecture at 11 o'clock. I had a really great turnout. There was about 25 people here that were basically learning about the importance of the macro and micronutrients and what kinds of foods cause inflammation in your body. So number 1 on my list of the top 8 that I consider to be the most inflammatory foods that can cause you to develop some of the symptoms I mentioned before, number 1 on my list would actually be gluten. Gluten is number 1, and I think of that because I've suffered with that myself. I've actually considered myself to be gluten intolerant. I did develop a lot of the symptoms of inflammation that go along with it, and gluten is in a lot of things that we eat, and you don't even realize it, but literally gluten is almost in everything processed, a lot of things that are even made at restaurants. You don't realize it, but gluten is there. So that's one thing to really look out for. Basically, to define gluten, because most of you may not even know what it is, it's actually a protein, and it's a protein that you find in wheat and grain and barley, wheat, barley, rye, those types of things. So if you're paying attention, try and take a look at the things that you're eating, and you want to focus in on gluten. The second thing I have listed as far as my inflammatory foods would be MSG, monosodium glutamate. MSG is real sneaky because you'll see it, and they've actually talked about it in Chinese restaurants. A lot of Chinese restaurants use MSG. It gives this umami type flavor that makes you feel like what you're eating is very tasty. It makes you feel like you're very full right after you had the meal, like it was a satisfying meal. But in fact, it's toxin for you. It's really not good for you. So MSG would be the second thing on my list. A lot of restaurants that you don't even realize are using MSG. You can even ask the staff, you can ask the waiters and so forth if MSG is something that's in the foods. So you can ask for them to not include it in the foods that you're eating. I've actually called a Chinese restaurant and told them, hey, listen, I don't want MSG in my food. I want to make sure that it's not there. So you can do that. You can talk to the people that are making your food and order things without MSG. So make sure that you pay attention to that one because it's another silent one that we need to worry about for inflammation. Next thing I have on my list is lactose. Basically, a lot of people have a milk allergy, and they don't even realize that milk is in some of the things that they're eating. Some people don't have a lactose like they're basically not lactose intolerant. They may be allergic to the protein casein, which is in milk. If patients develop lactose intolerance over time, it's basically you don't have the enzyme to help break down all of the lactose that you're intaking. So if you don't have the enzyme to break it down, or over time your body is just not absorbing very well, then that's going to be a problem for you. A lot of patients that eat foods that have milk in it and have the lactose in it, they start to develop a lot of bloating and the gas, and sometimes even diarrhea or constipation. So that's probably the next thing that I would suggest on my list. Soy. Soy is also on my list. I think that's important too because here in the U.S., a lot of the soy that we get is not natural, unprocessed soy. It's actually soy that's been modified in some way. And so I would put soy on my list as another inflammatory food. Again, you have to pay attention to how you're actually feeling. So if you're starting to develop some of these inflammatory symptoms that I mentioned, pay attention to how much soy is in your food. They also have the phytoestrogens in it, so we're also concerned about those because the phytoestrogens in soy, they actually mimic some estrogens and can be carcinogenic. So that's another thing I would say. Corn. There's movies that are based off of how important corn is, how genetically modified corn is really affecting everyone these days. A lot of the things that we eat, a lot of the packaged and processed includes a lot of corn. So pay attention. So corn is definitely inflammatory. When we say genetically modified, they're being harvested in fields where they're using herbicides, toxins, chemicals, so forth to actually grow the crops. And it's really affecting everybody and they don't realize it. So that's one thing to look into. Processed food in general, I would say no one should be eating processed food. Processed food should be on your very rare food diary or food pyramid where you're only eating, 1 or 2 times, if even that. I would say stay away from processed food as much as possible because anything processed is not going to be good for you. Let's see. Last on my list, which I would say is most important, would be sugar. Sugar is definitely right up there. I mentioned this in my last lecture, my last Periscope, how important sugar it is. Whether you're doing brown sugar, whether you're doing any different type of sugar that they have out there, they have even palm sugar, they have a ton of different kinds. It's important to stay away from sugar as much as possible and limit it. When I say as much as possible, yes, we are going to eat sugar and there's going to be small sugar content naturally in the foods that you eat, but you actually want it to remain as little as possible in your diet on an everyday basis because it does cause chronic inflammation, and that's what we're trying to avoid. Another thing I didn't mention was if you're allergic to certain foods and you've been tested for food intake as far as your allergies go, it's important to stay away from those because the more that you eat foods that you as an individual are allergic to, the more it's going to cause chronic inflammation in your body. For example, I have family members that suffer from a tomato allergy. And if you eat tomatoes in any form, whether it's cooked or not, they develop skin rashes and symptoms from it. Pay attention to that. So if you notice that no matter what type of food that has tomato in it, whether you're eating the pizza or you had some spaghetti or you just had cut up tomatoes with some mozzarella, pay attention if it causes the same types of symptoms and that same pattern of behavior. Because food really is your medicine, so it's important to pay attention to what you're putting in your body. So to round out my list, I mentioned the foods that you are allergic to. I also mentioned gluten. Sugar, I think, is the #1 killer we have. MSG. Also, dairy products. Try and stay away from the soy because we have too much processed soy here. Corn and processed foods in general. Those would be the top things on my list. All right. So I have a few questions. Feel free if you guys want to, if you want to send me any questions. I didn't have a chance to look at them last time, but I'm actually trying to look at them this time as I go through things. So hopefully this is helpful for you. Continue to give me hearts if you feel like it is, and we will go from there. Okay, so the first question is, what is MSG? MSG, we call it monosodium glutamate, and basically what it is, it's a neurotoxin that disrupts the nervous system, and by disrupting the nervous system, it actually causes you to have symptoms that you don't even realize. For example, if anything disrupts the nervous system, you're actually concerned about MSG because, say you mention brain fog, symptoms of dementia, some memory issues, numbness and tingling, those types of things. MSG is in a lot of the foods, so even though, yeah, it may be in everything that you're eating and it may be lurking, if it develops a long time over time and you're eating too much of it, you may develop some neurologic type symptoms. So that's important for you to note. because what it does is it overexcites the cells. And by overexciting the cells, then it causes you to have an overabundance of the neurologic symptoms. Okay, next question. Let's see. Is it dangerous to eat salad from other countries? So I can't vouch for how the crops are actually grown in other countries. I can kind of just base it off of what we see here in the United States. So I'm not saying that it's dangerous to eat them. I think you should find out more about where they're being grown. Also, depending on the location, there's certain trends in the growing seasons and so forth. I'm really not sure about that. I think that's something that once you go to that country, you can ask those questions, you can talk to the staff, you can talk about MSG, you can bring that up at the restaurants that you eat at. Say you're in Europe or you're actually in Africa or Asia, I would bring that up, because sometimes we don't realize that the same types of inflammatory foods we have here are inflammatory foods that we have over there too, because maybe they're processing their food in the same ways that we do. And last one I've got, what about beer and wine? Everything in moderation. So if somebody is drinking too much beer and too much wine, not good for you. I say everything in moderation. I don't think that you should stop yourself entirely from certain things. It also depends, some people do develop addictions and so forth, but there are definitely antioxidant benefits from you drinking red wine. So I don't see a problem with that if it's, based on a minimal basis and maybe 1 glass or 1 to 2 glasses. And that also depends on if you have other medical conditions. So that's one thing to take into consideration. But I say everything in moderation, try to limit it as much as possible, and then the red wine on occasion isn't a bad thing. And that's all I've got for today. So hopefully that rounded out a good list for you guys. Remember, everything that you put in your mouth, consider it medicine for your body. Try to nourish yourself as much as possible. And don't forget the 5 basics that I talked about last time regarding exercise and water and decreasing the sugar, which I consider to be the #1 killer of most people when it comes to inflammatory foods, mindfulness and sleep. I will see you next Wednesday. Take care.